What happens when two powerhouse personalities clash on live television, and one of Hollywood's most respected actors gets pushed to his absolute breaking point? The tension in Studio 1A was thick enough to cut with a knife, as Denzel Washington sat across from the panel of The View, his jaw set in a way that suggested this interview was about to take a very different turn than anyone expected. Before we dive into this explosive confrontation that had everyone talking, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds here. This is the kind of raw, unfiltered television moment that reminds you why live TV can be so unpredictable. The morning had started routinely enough. Denzel was there to promote his latest directorial project, a passion piece he'd been developing for over a decade. The audience was buzzing with excitement, phones already recording as the Oscar winner settled into his chair. But something felt different today. There was an edge in the air, a subtle tension that seemed to radiate from the moment the cameras started rolling. Whoopi leaned forward with that familiar smile, but her eyes held something sharper. So Denzel, your new film tackles some pretty controversial themes about social justice and police reform. Some critics are saying you're using your platform to push a political agenda rather than just telling a story. Denzel's expression didn't change, but those who knew him well could see the slight tightening around his eyes. Whoopi, I've been making films for over 4 decades. Every story worth telling has something to say about the human condition. If that makes people uncomfortable, maybe they need to ask themselves why. The other panelists exchanged glances. This wasn't the usual promotional softball they were expecting. Joy Behar jumped in. But don't you think there's a responsibility as an entertainer to remain neutral? Especially with how divided the country is right now. Denzel turned his attention to Joy, his voice measured but firm. Neutral. You want me to be neutral about injustice, about watching young black men get gunned down in the streets, about families being torn apart by a system that was never designed to protect them. His voice began to rise slightly. There's nothing neutral about watching your community suffer while people in comfortable studios debate whether speaking truth is too political. The studio audience was dead silent now. This wasn't the charming, media-trained Denzel they were used to seeing. This was a man who had clearly reached his limit with performative conversations about real issues. Whoopi wasn't backing down. Now hold on, Denzel. Nobody's saying don't speak your truth, but you have to understand that when you have the platform you have, your words carry weight. Some people might say you're being irresponsible by making such broad statements about law enforcement. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Denzel sat back in his chair, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. But it wasn't a pleasant one. Irresponsible. Whoopi, let me tell you what's irresponsible. What's irresponsible is sitting in these comfortable chairs, making millions of dollars, and pretending like we can have polite conversations about people dying in the streets. He leaned forward now, his voice gaining intensity. You want to talk about responsibility? I've been to more funerals than I care to count. I've held mothers while they cried over sons who will never come home. I've looked into the eyes of children who don't trust the people who are supposed to protect them. And you're sitting here telling me I'm being irresponsible for making a movie about it? The camera caught every micro-expression on the panelists' faces. This was clearly not going according to their planned script. Sunny Hostin tried to redirect. Denzel, I think what Whoopi is trying to say is that nuance is important in these discussions. Denzel's laugh was sharp and humorless. Nuance? You know what lacks nuance? A bullet. You know what lacks nuance? A knee on someone's neck for 9 minutes. But somehow when we try to talk about it, when we try to show it truthfully, suddenly everyone wants nuance. The tension was escalating by the second. Whoopi's voice took on a harder edge. You're putting words in my mouth, Denzel. I never said, don't tell these stories, but you can't expect everyone to just accept your version without question. My version, Denzel's voice was incredulous now. Whoopi, this isn't my version. This is documented reality. This is statistics. This is body camera footage. This is testimony from families who have lived through hell. What version are you living in where this is up for debate? The other panelists looked like they wanted to disappear into their chairs. The audience was completely transfixed. Social media was probably exploding, but nobody in that studio was thinking about anything except the raw emotion and conviction radiating from Denzel Washington. Whoopi straightened in her chair, her own voice rising. You know what, Denzel? You don't. get to come on this show and lecture us about reality. We've all been fighting these fights longer than you've been in Hollywood. Some of us have been putting our careers on the line for decades. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Denzel's expression shifted, and everyone in the studio could sense they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. The carefully orchestrated world of daytime television was about to be blown wide open, and there was no going back now. The camera zoomed in on Denzel's face as he processed Whoopi's words, his jaw working silently for a moment that felt eternal. When he finally spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet, the kind of quiet that comes before thunder. Fighting these fights longer than I've been in Hollywood. Denzel's voice was so quiet, the microphones had to strain to pick it up, but every word cut through the studio like a blade. Whoopi, I was getting death threats for playing Malcolm X while you were making Sister Act. I was being blacklisted by studios for refusing to play drug dealers and thugs while you were winning Oscars for safe roles that made white audiences comfortable. The studio was so silent you could hear the cameras worry. Whoopi's face went through a series of expressions, from shock to anger to something that looked like genuine hurt. But Denzel wasn't finished. You want to talk about putting careers on the line? I turned down millions of dollars because I refused to perpetuate stereotypes. I walked away from franchise deals because they wanted me to be the magical Negro who dies saving the white hero. I've been fighting this fight since before some of these panelists were born, and I didn't do it from the safety of a talk show couch. Joy Behar attempted to jump in. Denzel, I think we're all on the same side here, but he held up a hand that silenced her immediately. No, Joy, we're not all on the same side. Some of us are actually in the fight, and some of us are commentating from the sidelines while cashing checks from the same system we claim to oppose. His eyes never left Whoopi's face. You built your career on being the acceptable voice of dissent. The one who could criticize the system just enough to seem rebellious, but never enough to actually threaten anything. Whoopi's composure finally cracked. How dare you? How dare you? You sit there and question my commitment to this community? I've used my platform to lift up voices that would never be heard otherwise. I've fought battles you don't even know about, behind closed doors, right? Denzel shot back. In private meetings with executives who pat you on the head and tell you you're making a difference while they go back to business as usual. When's the last time you said something on this show that actually cost you something? When's the last time you took a stand that put your comfort at risk? The other panelists looked like they were watching a car crash in slow motion. Sarah N. tried to lighten the mood. Maybe we should take a breath, but Denzel cut her off with a look that could have melted steel. No, let's not take a breath. Let's not do what we always do, which is back down the moment things get uncomfortable. You want to know what's irresponsible? What's irresponsible is having platforms like this and using them to have conversations that make everyone feel good about themselves while nothing actually changes. Whoopi leaned forward, her voice shaking with anger. You think you're the only one who's sacrificed for this. You think you're the only one who's fought. I've been in this industry for 50 years. Denzel, 50 years of being told I was too black, too loud, too much. I've opened doors that you walked through without even acknowledging they existed. Opened doors. Denzel's laugh was bitter. Whoopi, you didn't open doors. You made yourself small enough to fit through the cracks they left for you. There's a difference between being the first to make it through and being the first to make it through on their terms. The accusation hit like a physical blow. Whoopi's face went through a spectrum of emotions before settling on something cold and dangerous. You arrogant son of a bitch. You think because you've won some awards and made some movies that you get to judge the rest of us. You think your way is the only way to fight. I think my way actually fights, Denzel replied, his voice steady despite the personal attack. Your way accommodates itself to power and calls it progress. My way challenges power and accepts the consequences. Sonny Hostin made another attempt to mediate. Can we just acknowledge that there are different ways to create change? But Whoopi was beyond diplomatic solutions now. No, Sonny, let him finish. Let him tell us all how pure and righteous he is compared to the rest of us sellouts. Her voice was dripping with sarcasm, but underneath it was real pain. Tell us more about how you're the real revolutionary while the rest of us are just house Negroes keeping the master happy. The racial terminology hung in the air like a toxic cloud. The audience audibly gasped. This had crossed every line of professional television discourse. Denzel's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. "You said it, Whoopi." "I didn't." His voice was steady, but there was something final in it. "And the fact that you reached for that particular phrase tells me everything I need to know about how you really see this conversation." "Don't you dare try to flip this," Whoopi shot back. "You're the one who came in here with your holier-than-thou attitude, talking down to everyone like we're children who don't understand the struggle. You're the one who made this personal." "I made it real," Denzel corrected. "There's a difference. You're the one who made it personal the moment you decided. My truth was too inconvenient for your comfortable morning show format." Ana Navarro, who had been silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke up. "This is exactly the kind of division that helps nobody. We're fighting each other instead of fighting the real problems." Denzel turned to her with a look of weary patience. "Ana, the real problem is that we keep pretending we're fighting when we're actually just performing. We keep pretending that having these conversations in safe spaces with predetermined outcomes is the same as actually confronting the systems that oppress people." "So what do you want us to do?" Whoopi demanded. "Burn it all down. Destroy everything. We've built throwaway decades of progress because it's not perfect enough for your standards." "I want you to stop calling it progress," Denzel replied quietly. "I want you to stop pretending that being allowed to sit at the table means the game isn't rigged. I want you to stop being grateful for crumbs and start demanding the whole meal." The confrontation was reaching a fever pitch, and everyone in the studio could sense that something was about to break. The carefully maintained facade of professional discourse had already crumbled, but there was still further to fall. Section 3 Whoopi's face was flushed now, her voice rising to a level that made the sound engineers scramble to adjust their equipment, demanding the whole meal. "I think you invented activism, Denzel. You think the rest of us have just been sitting around waiting for you to show us how it's done? I think some of you have been sitting around getting comfortable while others do the real work," Denzel replied, his voice cutting through her anger like ice. "I think some of you have confused having a platform with actually using it for something that matters." The executive producer was frantically gesturing from behind the cameras, but there was no stopping this now. This had gone beyond television, beyond entertainment, into something raw and primal that couldn't be contained by commercial breaks or network standards. "You want to know about real work?" Whoopi stood up from her chair, an unprecedented move that sent shockwaves through the studio. "I've been using my platform to educate people about issues you won't even touch. I've been having conversations that make people think, that change minds gradually, that build bridges instead of burning them down." Denzel remained seated, but his presence somehow filled the entire studio, building bridges to where Whoopi, to a slightly more comfortable version of the same broken system. "You're not building bridges, you're building escape routes for your own conscience. That's enough." Whoopi's voice was shaking with fury. "You don't get to come into my house and disrespect everything I've worked for. You don't get to diminish the work I've done just because it doesn't meet your impossible standards of purity. Your house," Denzel's eyebrows raised slightly. "This isn't your house, Whoopi. This is their house. You're just the tenant they keep around because you know how to keep the noise down and the complaints manageable." The insult hit its mark. Whoopi's hands were trembling now, whether from anger or something deeper. "Get out," she said quietly. "I'm serious. Get out of my studio. Your studio." Denzel's smile was sharp as a razor. "There it is again. You really believe you own this, don't you? You really think this platform belongs to you, instead of the corporation that signs your checks and controls every word that comes out of your mouth." Joy Behar made one last desperate attempt at damage control. "Can we please just calm down and remember we're on live television?" "No," Denzel said, standing up slowly. "Let's not calm down. Let's not pretend this is about television. This is about truth, and truth is never calm. Truth is never comfortable. Truth doesn't care about your ratings or your advertisers or your carefully constructed image." Whoopi was pacing now, something the viewers had never seen before. "You think you're so much better than the rest of us? You think your way is the only righteous way. But let me tell you something, Denzel Washington, change happens in many ways, and not all of them involve burning everything down and starting over. And not all of them involve accepting table scraps and calling it a feast," Denzel shot back. "Spent so long being grateful for what they gave you that you've forgotten what you actually deserved. I deserve respect, Whoopi said, her voice breaking slightly. I deserve to not be talked down to by someone who thinks his way is the only way. I deserve to have my contributions acknowledged instead of dismissed. For the first time since the confrontation began, Denzel's expression softened slightly. Whoopi, you do deserve respect. But you also deserve better than what you've settled for. We all do. That's my point. But Whoopi was beyond hearing olive branches. No, you don't get to do that. You don't get to tear down everything I've built and then try to make it sound like it was for my own good. You made your choice about how to live your life and fight your battles. Don't you dare tell me mine are wrong. I'm not telling you they're wrong, Denzel said quietly. I'm telling you they're not enough. And deep down, you know it too. That's why this conversation is making you so angry. The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Security personnel had appeared at the edges of the studio, unsure whether to intervene. The other panelists looked like they wanted to disappear entirely. Whoopi stopped pacing and looked directly at Denzel. You know what? You're right about one thing. I am angry. I'm angry that someone I respected has come onto my show and shown such disrespect for everything I've worked for. I'm angry that you think your way is the only way to fight injustice. And I'm angry that you're using my platform to tear down other people in the fight instead of focusing on the real enemies. The real enemies include complacency, Denzel replied. They include people who have platforms and waste them on safe conversations that change nothing. They include people who mistake being allowed to speak for actually being heard. Get out, Whoopi said again, her voice final. I'm done with this conversation. I'm done with your arrogance and your judgment and your complete inability to see that other people might have valid ways of fighting for change. Denzel looked around the studio one more time, taking in the shocked faces of the panelists, the stunned silence of the audience, the frantic activity of the production crew trying to figure out how to handle this unprecedented situation. I'll leave, he said quietly. But I want everyone watching to understand something. This is what happens when you try to have real conversations about real issues. This is what happens when you refuse to play the game by their rules. This is what happens when you choose truth over comfort. He started to remove his microphone, his movements deliberate and unhurried despite the chaos around him. And Whoopi, I hope someday you remember who you used to be before you decided being accepted was more important than being effective. With that final blow, Denzel Washington walked off the set of The View, leaving behind a studio in chaos and a conversation that would be dissected and debated for years to come. The cameras kept rolling as Whoopi stood alone at the table, her colleagues unsure whether to comfort her or pretend the whole thing never happened. The raw emotion, the unfiltered truth, and the complete breakdown of professional decorum had created a moment of television that nobody would ever forget. Two legends had collided, and the impact had shattered every expectation of what daytime talk shows were supposed to be. If this incredible confrontation between two Hollywood powerhouses has you thinking about the nature of activism, celebrity platforms, and what it really means to fight for change, make sure you subscribe to the channel and drop a comment below. What do you think? Was Denzel right to call out what he saw as complacency? Or did he cross the line in how he challenged Whoopi's approach to using her platform?